You're listening to In the NoCo, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Thursday, September 28th. I'm Erin O'Toole. A new exhibit opens tomorrow evening at the Museum of Boulder. Proclaiming Colorado's Black history will highlight the stories of Black Coloradans whose contributions have shaped this area in meaningful ways. I'm talking now with Adrian Miller, who's the lead curator and co-project director of this new exhibit. You may also know him as the Colorado-based author of several books, including Black Smoke, African Americans, and the United States of Barbecue. Adrian, welcome to In the NoCo.
Hey, glad to be with you.
Let's start with the title of the exhibit, because it really feels like there's some significance to the words here. Why Proclaiming Colorado's Black history?
Well, there's actually a very interesting story there. So when we first got the grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, we were calling the project, it was about the vanishing history of Black Boulder. And we thought, no, we don't want to talk about that. We want to proclaim the history that African Americans have had in Boulder, as well as in Colorado. So proclaiming it is really to share stories that people may not know, bring them to light. So it's really about sharing these stories with the broader public about Colorado's interesting Black history, because we've had a lot of next level people here in this state.
And I love this idea of elevating these stories that people may not have heard of, but people who have really had an impact on Colorado. Can you talk about the importance of sharing the stories of Black Coloradans in this way?
So one thing is that I don't think there's ever been an exhibit like this proclaiming Colorado's Black history in terms of how comprehensive it's trying to be, as well as, since it's housed at the Museum of Boulder, bringing to light some of the stories of Black Boulderites. But it's important because we're in a time now where we see it across the country where Black history is actually being vanished, where there are laws being passed and other things to discourage telling a more comprehensive, giving a more comprehensive view of our history. And that's crazy. So at this time, it may seem like an obvious thing, but it's not something we should take for granted. And so Colorado does not have a reputation for being a very diverse place. In fact, in front of audiences, I often joke, Colorado is very diverse. We have a lot of different types of white people.
Oh, no.
But this exhibit is really going to highlight just the various people who have contributed to Colorado's history at a time when it seems like teaching Black history is being discouraged, to really lean into that, as the young people say, and share these stories.
And tell us about the makeup of the exhibit. What are we going to see and experience when we visit the museum?
So the first thing is the opening text panel is a silhouette of Annabelle Riley, who, as far as we know, is the first African-American child to be born in Colorado in 1864. We don't have a picture of her or anything, but we have her silhouette. She welcomes you to the exhibit and tells you about the exhibit's themes. And then we go through the early arrivals. So we've had people of African heritage in this area. Technically, since the 1500s, there was an African man named Esteban, who wasn't sub-Saharan African. He was more Moroccan in heritage, but he was an enslaved person that was with the early Spanish explorers in the region. Not sure they made it all the way to Colorado, but they were definitely in Arizona and New Mexico. Then we talk about people who came here because of fur trading, because they were enslaved. Even though slavery has never been official in Colorado, we had enslaved people here. So some were forcibly brought. Others came here for economic opportunity, to be in the mining business, to start businesses and things like that. And then through different parts of the exhibit, we pause and we highlight certain stories that evoke that age. So we have several people like Barney Ford, the successful businessman in Colorado, who we highlight. Julia Greeley, known for her charity, who is now being offered up by the Roman Catholic Church for sainthood. So she's going through that process. Yeah, first Coloradan, first African-American to be considered for that. And then the exhibit transitions into how African-Americans built community through church, through starting all Black communities. The most famous of that is Dearfield. And we have installations to kind of tell those stories. We have an installation of Second Baptist Church, which is the only predominantly Black church now in northern Colorado, but a fixture in Boulder's community. So we talk about the role of faith. We have an installation of Dearfield to talk about not only that agricultural colony that was outside of Greeley, but also the Black homesteading movement. A lot of people don't think of African Americans when it comes to homesteading. Then we transition, we talk about civil rights, the struggle to get equality and to recognize the humanity of African Americans here in Colorado. And then we come all the way to the end of the exhibit where we have an art collection to delve into the topics of Afrofuturism. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a way to imagine Black possibilities that are free of racism and recognize individuality and humanity of African Americans. So we wanted to end on that point and ask people, how are you going to be a great ancestor to future Black Coloradans?
I love that. Personally, as a Black Panther fan, which is my limited knowledge of Afrofuturism, I'm really excited to see this collection.
Yeah, you might say Wakanda forever by the time you get to the end of it, or at least Colorado forever.
I really love that. I love that acknowledgement that history isn't static and people's role is evolving all the time. Well, I'd like to wrap up by asking about kind of the personal impact of this exhibit for you, because so much of your work is focused on centering the voices and experiences of Black Americans. I'm thinking about your book, Black Smoke, which, of course, was a great history of barbecue, but also was aimed at bringing attention and awareness to the role of Black Americans in developing this cuisine. So I'm wondering how it feels for you to see this exhibit brought to life.
Yeah, well, I think this really started because I opened my big mouth about what I was dreaming about doing down the road. And I wanted to write a definitive history of Black Coloradans. And when I opened my mouth at that dinner party, there were several board members of the Museum of Boulder that like, hey, that's kind of cool. And then that led to so this is it's really just part of my broader work, which is exactly what you said. I like showing the impact that the African Americans have had in various contexts. I love telling the stories and talking about Black Americans in a space where people don't expect it. And so this is all part of that. There are just so many stories that are buried in newspapers and books that have a lot of dust on them. And while I was writing my book on the history of soul food, I read every single issue of the African American newspapers available at the Denver Public Library, which are on microfilm. So that shows you how long ago I started. But there were Black newspapers here from the 1890s on, and they were chronicling Black life. And that gave me a window on this history that we just don't get in school. We get the highlights, right? But in terms of how people really at a granular level affected Colorado life, we just don't get that. And that's why I want people to support this exhibit, because now here's an effort, a starting point to tell those stories. So we need support from the community because, hey, when people see this great exhibit and it's a smash success and there's lines out the door, it'll probably spur other people to say, hey, you know what? We could do something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Adrian Miller is a soul food historian, author, and lead curator for Proclaiming Colorado's Black History, which opens Friday evening at the Museum of Boulder. Adrian, this was great. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Hey, good to be with you, and I'm here to help.
And I want to mention that KUNC is a promotional sponsor of the exhibit, which opens this weekend with a kickoff event Friday evening where you can tour the exhibit and hear from Adrian and other curators. You can find details and tickets at the Museum of Boulder's website, and you'll find a link in our show notes. That's it for us today here on In the NoCo. We'll be back tomorrow with more of what's happening in northern Colorado. Our producer is Jocelyn Mesa Miranda. Robin Vincent is our executive producer. I'm Erin O'Toole. Catch you next time.